Mack has been making headlines again due to her recent 7-episode podcast with the CBC. This podcast, hosted by Natalie Robomed, if I'm pronouncing that name incorrectly, I am so sorry. The podcast is hosted by Natalie Robomed, and it details not just Allison's experience inside Nxivm, but how she got into the cult and how she grew to be basically one of its leaders. She's recently been released from prison and was released early for good behavior. There have been a lot of mixed reviews regarding her release and this podcast, and specifically, some of her own survivors are sharing that they are not going to listen to her podcast. They've expressed that they hope that the podcast is cathartic for Allison, but they didn't really feel comfortable discussing it, which is completely understandable if you ask me. I can only imagine how difficult it is to hear your or try to gain sympathy from an audience. But the thing that's really interesting about Allison Mack and her involvement in Nxivm is she really kind of jumped over the boundary between victim and perpetrator. And we are going to try to unpack it all today because I listened to the entire podcast twice. So without further ado, sit back and relax and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cults, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. I post several videos every single week on one of these topics, so if you like this sort of thing, please consider subscribing. I'd absolutely love to have you here. Also, we finally have our very first single parent to feature today. I've asked subscribers who are single parents to please email me your Amazon wish list and a little bit about yourself. And hopefully, the wonderful supporters of this channel will be able to help you provide a wonderful holiday season for your children, or in this economy, just some extra food on the table or even some coats. So, today we have our first parent. Today we have Corey Rue. Corey says, "You shared our family's list last year, and it was such a blessing. I had no intention of asking this year, but I'm in a very tight place. After the election, the market my job was in crashed. I made it to the third round of layoffs, but I was laid off in May of this year and have been living on unemployment and food stamps since." I'm sorry to hear that. That's really, really hard. "I've been through so many applications and interviews, but I've still not found a new job. I'm truly embarrassed to ask, but I don't know what else to do. I am desperate. I understand if 2 years in a row is too much, but if you are still sharing the Christmas wish list this year, I'd be so incredibly grateful for your help. We're sharing it right now, and please do not be embarrassed." I think as somebody with a very, very small platform at this point, it's kind of my responsibility to give back as much as I can. And hopefully, if people have the means, they'll also give back. So please do not feel embarrassed. It's really difficult to ask for help, and I'm really glad that you are doing so. I am the mother of 3 kids, PJ, Zoe, and Arrow. PJ is a smart, beautiful 15-year-old. She's sensitive, kind, and patient. She loves art, Legos, dragons, and dinosaurs. Zoe is 13 and a half and is not what you might expect from a middle child. She is by far my boldest. She is brave and gentle. She likes arts, crafts, fashion, and trying new things. Arrow is my 8-year-old boy. He has struggles, but he is an endless well of energy and uses all of it to love on his family. Isopods and rain frogs are his special interests, and he knows everything about them. He also loves new sensory toys and is always carrying a fidget toy along. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. And she shared a couple photos of her kids. They're so cute. Aw, thank you so much for sharing this with us. The Amazon wish list will be in the pinned comment down below. So please go ahead and try to support Corey this year. And Corey, I really hope that you find a new role. As someone who's also recently left her full-time job, I know how difficult the job market is right now. So I really, really hope you find something moving into the new year. And without further ado, let's begin to discuss all things Allison Mack. Now, this video, I am just going to summarize what my understanding was of the podcast. I listened to it not once, but twice. Once just for context, and the second time I wanted to focus from a more critical lens. Because if I'm being honest, and maybe this is just because I've covered so many groups like this, I've read so many survivor stories who are similar to Allison. The first time I listened, I did feel a lot of empathy towards her. And then I started reading the comments, and there were people who brought up a lot of really, really good points. So I wanted to listen to it again and try to kind of shut up my empathizer in me and try to listen as if I was one of the survivors, or try to have more of a critical lens from which I was listening to the podcast. And it truly did give me a fresh new perspective. Because something I always say in these cult videos is the line between being a victim and a perpetrator in these groups can be very, very light due to the indoctrination that people receive in cults. People are very often pushed to do things that are not just outside their comfort zone, but violate their own ethics and morals. And it sounds like this is what happened with Allison. When we first meet Allison in the very first episode, we learn about her upbringing. She was born in Germany and moved to the United States. She had a very creative musician father. She had a Montessori school teacher for a mother. It seems like she had a very wholesome upbringing. And she mentions something in the first episode that really struck a chord with me, that they always assumed the best outcome. Her family conditioning was very much like, it's always going to be okay. It's always going to be okay. And so I think when you fast forward to when she's going through her trial and people are like, she doesn't even seem that remorseful. She seems like she's trying to get away with something. She did have that mindset, as confirmed by her in the podcast in later episodes, that she just tried to assume, okay, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. We learn that from a very, very early age, she felt very competitive with other women specifically, especially because she grew up in the acting community. And as an actor myself, it is very, very easy to feel like you're competing against women who you would otherwise be friends with. I've actually had to do a lot of retraining, not because I felt jealous of any other women, but because other women made me feel less than. I always felt like my bullies growing up were other women. I used to think having female relationships was really, really difficult. And now I cherish my female friendships and I celebrate them and we celebrate each other. And it's so much healthier. So I do empathize with the fact that as she's growing up, as she's becoming an actress, she is competing with women that look just like her. And I know it could be a bit of a mind fuck for her. Additionally, she is very, very clearly a people pleaser, which also reminds me a lot of me. She wants to do a good job. She wants her teachers to like her. She wants her directors to love working with her. She wants to follow the rules and she wants to be the best at what she's doing, no matter what it is, whether it's her being an actor or her being a cult member. She wanted to be the best that there was, and that was to her detriment. However, Allison Mack was very privileged and very lucky. She started working in commercials when she was just a kid, and we all know, I'm sure at this point, how difficult it is to jump into the entertainment industry. I mean, I've been professionally pursuing acting for 9 years now, and I have a couple commercials and one TV show and one movie under my belt, very small roles. It takes so much time and it is so difficult to want to keep going when you're not seeing the results for years or even decades. But she was getting consistent work as a kid in LA. She moved out of her family's house at 16, and at 19, she booked Smallville. She booked a series regular role. And so she seemed to have this kind of detachment from her success, almost like she was afraid to face it. She was making $140,000 a month So almost $2 million a year on her television show. And she just was kind of blind to it. She didn't want to know. She didn't try to learn how to manage her money. She just kind of gave her boyfriend at the time a credit card. And by the end of their relationship, was when she finally realized how much he was spending of her money. And it just kind of like shocked her. So she just wasn't fully savvy with some of those, you know, I don't want to say basic because that sounds insulting because I know a lot of us aren't told about finances, but she didn't seem to be fully aware of what like being an adult was, where you need to manage your money, have a budget, be more cautious. You can't just hand friends, your credit card and trust them that they're not going to spend all your money. And you can't trust that a program is going to change your entire life just because it costs a lot of money, which I think is what kind of happened with Nxivm. Now, something she said in episode 1 of the podcast contradicts a bit what she says later in the second episode of the podcast, which is that she was always really uncomfortable being in like a sexual role. She always got the like bookish, smart, nerdy girl, not really the like love interest who is touted as like this beautiful sex symbol. But then in episode 2, she discusses how she would use her sexuality to her advantage with men. And she found that men were more easily manipulated because if she flirted with them, she would get the attention that she wanted. She could get what she wanted out of these men. So I thought it was very, very interesting. But later, you do find out that she was SA'd as a young girl on a set. And it really made her uncomfortable. And she ended up being blamed for that encounter. The man himself was not blamed. He, in fact, talked to her about how inappropriate she was being. And she was 14 years old. So it does paint this picture of how intimacy and the lack of trust of men is probably playing a very significant role in her life from a younger age. And you can tell throughout the podcast that Allison is a very altruistic young woman. She is constantly seeking, and she does have this desire to be the very, very best version of herself. And she's willing to do almost anything, as we know, to become what she's perceiving as the best version of herself. So a little bit before she books Smallville, she's a teenager and she starts to break out. And as someone who had terrible acne and was also on Accutane in college, it feels like the worst thing ever at the time, especially when you're young and you're pursuing an industry that is really dependent on how you look. Even to this day, I grapple with how I look on a day-to-day basis. One day I'm like, I feel great about myself. The next day I'm like, I need to change everything about myself. It is an ongoing challenge for me, at least. And it's probably a symptom of the industry I've been trying to break into for almost a decade. But she starts to get really bad acne, gets on Accutane, and starts to have more depressive episodes. She gets really, really sad. She becomes very, very unsatisfied in her life. Even though she is on this really, really popular television show, Smallville, by the time she's 25, so she had been on that show for about 6 years, she felt this like she describes it as an ennui, as just not fully satisfied. And her friend and co star on the show was also feeling those feelings. And it was her friend that brought her into Nxivm. She had gone and had this incredible weekend, the Executive Success Program that was featured in the Vow docuseries. And she came back and told Allison, "This is incredible. You have to come. Like, you have to go. It's going to be incredible." So at this time, she's on the West Coast. I can't remember if she took her first course in LA or in Vancouver. I think it was in LA. And she felt great. And they ask if she wants to go meet Vanguard. She wants to go meet the cult leader, or at the time, she didn't know he was a cult leader. And she hops in the private jet and she goes. And I'm sure she thought it was an incredible experience. She's already getting this special treatment. And she goes and she meets Keith Raniere. And I don't know if you watched The Vow, you had the same experience. But for me, when I watched it, I was like, you can tell he's targeting her immediately. He seems enamored by her.
I go to see a a film or a piece of artwork, or if something happens to me, I'm so excited. And one blissful, joyful.
You know, we can practice generating an extreme feeling of joy over anything. In our methods that we have, especially in 2C. That it's one of our intensives. What's it called now? Civilization? Civilization? I mean, what if artistic endeavors were really bogus? What if art was just an excuse for those who couldn't do it?
And it is sometimes.
The most excitement that you've ever felt is yours to have all the time, independent of art. The bad news is you sort of have to divorce yourself from the thought that it comes from the art. If you feel that art is necessary for that, that's almost a self-condemnation. Why is this emotional?
Hi.
It's okay. She comes in club.
I know, right? I should be used to this. It's what I do for a living. Because it's pointing at something I've never thought about. And a part of me is kind of freaked out about accepting this. I'm used to that self-condemnation. I'm comfortable with that. If I let go of that belief, that it's not the art that's giving me this feeling, it's me that's giving me this feeling, then I have to trust that I will be capable of giving myself that feeling. And I don't necessarily trust that right now. And so that's scary, because I want that feeling.
Just like with every other cult, specifically cults like Scientology, who are a little more mainstream, there are more people aware of them. It's in part because they had celebrity followers. Also, celebrity followers have more money to potentially, bankroll the cult itself on top of their network of other rich people who they could recruit in. So I think that he intentionally tried to make sure that Allison Mack was going to become a loyal follower of his. I am almost certain that Keith Raniere knew who Allison Mack was and was essentially grooming her to be what she came. Because even in that interaction with him, you can tell she wants to ask him an intriguing question. She wants to be memorable. She wants to do a good job for Keith Raniere. And in that scene, in the vow, there is almost this strange flirtation between the two of them, in my opinion. He's less of like a fatherly figure or a mentor and more, a little flirtatious, oddly enough, in my opinion. And then she goes back to LA and she needs to shoot her show. And a few years later, the show gets canceled. And throughout the last few seasons of the show, she's continuing to do weekend courses. She's doing 16-day courses, and she is getting her ego and her self-esteem broken down throughout that time. I think when you have someone who is inherently a people pleaser, I had a friend who called me a perfectionist once and a people pleaser, and I was like, oh, no, I'm not. And she said to me, you have such a negative connotation surrounding being a people pleaser or a perfectionist that you're afraid to identify as one because you think it's going to make you bad. That's how much of a perfectionist you are. That's how much of a people pleaser you are. And I remember hearing that and thinking, oh my God, I think you're right. And immediately I knew I had a problem and I knew it was something I had to work on. And if you're at all like that, and I think Allison Mack is like that, if you're called a narcissist, it might be one of the most triggering things you ever hear because you've lived your whole life just trying to fit in, trying to be good enough, trying to make other people happy, trying to be the best, because all of your value is tied in Am I the best daughter? Am I the best actor? Am I the best student? Am I the best employee? Am I the best wife? Whatever it is, it becomes a part of your identity. And it's the opposite of what a narcissist is, because you're constantly like, I want to make people happy. I want to make everybody else around me happy. I don't want to step on toes. I don't want to hurt anybody. And then if you accidentally do, you're absolutely devastated. Now, if I can wax poetic about Allison's psychology, I'm not a psychologist and I'm not diagnosing her at all with anything. But what it seems like to me is that Keith Raniere saw this woman with a ton of potential, but with also a ton of pain. He saw somebody who was desperate to have somebody tell her that she is the best, whatever it is. He recognizes that she just aims to please. So what does he do? He makes sure that he breaks her down enough so that she becomes so dependent on his acceptance of her that he can basically mold her into whoever he wants her to be. Now, obviously, something like this intense of an indoctrination process doesn't justify any of the horrific things that she did, because I think there are character flaws within Allison that really, really do speak to some of her insidious behavior. The way she talks about her experience and where she feels shame and guilt in the podcast, anyways, she really only gets emotional when she talks about, oh, my family found out about all these horrible things I did, and they had to hear in the courtroom about all these terrible things that I did. And maybe it's due to trauma, I don't know, but she did seem to kind of gloss over, like, oh, I did all these awful things, and how could I do all those awful things? You didn't hear her like break down. And maybe it's because she's had several years by herself, essentially processing all of those things. So maybe she's come to a peaceful place within herself regarding her behavior. But it did come across on the podcast a little bit like she's only upset she got found out. Like maybe if she had left the cult on her own and it hadn't gone to court and it hadn't been such a media frenzy, she would have probably just backed away into the shadows, maybe said some apologies, and just prayed nobody found out on a grand scale. But there was no begging. It was more of like, well, this is my story. And if people don't like the way I tell it or don't agree, that's fine. And maybe it's a coping mechanism of a people pleaser, because sometimes I find myself doing that. Like if I get negative comments on my channel, I'm like, well, my intentions are really good. And if they don't see that, like that's on them. But it still hurts me to see negative comments. So all you can do is try to be better, but maybe it's also like she's having this mindset of like, okay, well, I've done my time and now I'm done. So in 2015, when she's about 28 years old, still so young, she decides she's going to move to Albany and live full time at the like mecca of this cult. And this is where she starts getting very close with Keith. Everybody kind of lives in these townhouses in this neighborhood together, and Keith Raniere would go on these like 4 a.m. walks with people and have these long conversations. And throughout different programming within Nxivm, the people in the cult are constantly being indoctrinated with very, I don't even know if you can say, I guess it is very like misogynistic values that, you know, women are selfish and women are tainted and monogamy is just ownership. The women who are with one man and that one man has his harem of women. So throughout her time in Albany, she's not just running new workshops and starting to feel like she has purpose again. She's running a course called The Source, which utilized some acting tools, which was basically a life coaching program for actors. That's kind of the assumption that I'm making. So she would use tools that actors use to become different characters to help other actors be better at life, essentially. And I'm pretty sure anyone who was a non-actor would jump in and do the course if they really wanted to. She also had Janess. She wasn't in charge of Janess, but I do believe she started being more of an authority figure within that group. It was the all girls group within the cult, but they were constantly being indoctrinated to believe that, women were less than men and monogamy is just a method of control. And women are stubborn and women need to really look at themselves because they're the tainted ones. They're the bad ones. So it kind of would create, I'd imagine, this like subconscious impulse to be just accepted by the men that you're interacting with in this cult, especially if the main guy is the main mentor. If he has seen something in you and he simultaneously is putting you into some kind of a leadership position, but constantly tearing you down and calling you a narcissist and asking for your opinion and then shaming you for providing your opinion almost at the same time, it would be detrimental to your mental health. But you're also being told that he's the smartest man in the world and he's the most compassionate and empathetic man in the world. So there would be such a weird mental gymnastics game going on inside your head because I imagine all you would want is for your mentor to think that you're doing a good job. So one day he tells you you're doing a good job and the next day he tears you down. And that's just the cult leader's MO because they want you to stay in the cult. They want you to be dependent on the cult. They want any growth that you have experienced to be thanks to the cult and the cult leader. They don't give a shit about you and your growth. They give a shit about being able to control you and being able to use you as a pawn to get what they want. And Allison turned out to be the very best pawn that Keith Raniere could have ever found. So we've discussed a little bit about Allison's past trauma when it comes to intimacy. And she shares this with a good friend of hers named Danny. And Danny suggests that she go to get some help with her intimacy issues. And so she trusts Danny. Danny's her best friend. So she approaches Keith and says, I have these intimacy issues. I have a really bad relationship with feeling sexy. And he tells her that in order to work through those issues, they would have to be intimate together. This podcast brought up a new belief from Nxivm that I had never actually heard about before, and it was theoretical understanding versus visceral understanding. And the idea is that it's very easy to have a theoretical understanding. Like it's very easy to read a recipe and understand how much of each ingredient that you need. But it's a visceral understanding to actually be able to do the recipe and cook the meal and get that done. So true healing, according to Keith, doesn't happen in theoretical understanding. It only happens in visceral understanding. So according to Keith, he and Allison couldn't just talk about her intimacy issues and try to help her get better at intimacy. She would have to have a visceral understanding of that. So she would have to be intimate with Keith. And she says that when she felt so weird about it. She didn't like it. But he would say that he's moving the energy within her. He's moving out the bad things. He's giving her more of his godly energy. And then immediately following, they would debrief. They would have these intense philosophical conversations about the experience that Allison just had. Can you imagine being coerced to sleep with somebody you don't want to sleep with, and then you have to hear about how good enough or not good enough you were in that experience immediately after? And that was it for probably years with Allison. But she's so desperate for growth. She's so desperate to be the perfect pupil that she's going through with it. And this is when he opens the door to help her become even better. And he shares the idea of the sorority with her called DOS. And it basically means in Latin that you're submitting to your master. And he would be her master. She would start waking up at 5 in the morning, do a cold shower. She would run 6 miles a day. She was only allowed to be between 105 and 107 pounds. She was only allowed to eat 500 calories a day. And she was forced to wear some type of permanent jewelry. And she chose to wear a permanent belly chain because she could wear it under all of her clothes for set. She also wore a device to maintain her weight. And this is really, really heartbreaking. She would wear something called a cilice, I believe it's what it's called or how you pronounce it. And it was effectively a belt she would wear under her clothes that had tiny staples that would poke in her body if she had a big meal. So, if you have a big meal, your stomach's a little, more engulfed than it normally is. And it would literally like stab into her skin. So that was a means of her maintaining her weight, was basically self-mutilation. There were 3 other women involved in DOS, and one of them was Nikki Klein at the time. And this is really interesting about the podcast because there was this big controversy about Allison marrying Nikki so Nikki could stay in the States longer because Nikki was Canadian. And I always assumed that that meant they were very, very close friends, but there was actually an inherent competitiveness between the two of them. Allison in this podcast did not seem to like Nikki very much. There seemed to be this just tension, like they both were vying for the Vanguard's attention. So after time, after Keith exhibiting all of this control on them, he decides that he wants to expand it, and he tells Allison that she needs to start building her own group of slaves, and India Oxenberg would be her first recruit. Her and India were very, very close friends. They lived together, they shared clothing, they really, really cared about each other. And India was younger. India at this point, I believe, is still in her early to mid 20s. She's a little baby, like she's young, but she was targeted by Keith himself. Something that was very interesting as we move through the podcast, because you do hear Allison talk so much about being a people pleaser and just wanting to help women and wanting to do all these things. And then you hear her say, oh, yeah, well, there's this other side of me I call the little dictator, which is a character trait I've always had since I was a little kid. Like if I was playing with my little brother and he didn't do what I wanted him to do, the little dictator would come out and I would, be more firm. And she said that that's how she was with her slaves. She had that dynamic within her. She had that capability to be this mean dictator. But she says she thought she was helping these women. So maybe there was a piece of that people pleaser coming to play where I have to be in charge. I have to make Keith proud. This is a part of my growth, and I'm going to be this little dictator and be mean to my slaves and my downline or whatever it is. Or did she kind of get a power trip? Did she like being in that position of power? Was it a scenario where she said, well, I've done these hard things. I'm being abused, but she doesn't know she's being abused at the time. So you should do it. You should do it. You want to grow? You eat 500 calories a day. That's what I'm doing. You want to grow? Take a freezing cold shower every morning. That's what I do. Let's do readiness drills. I've been doing readiness drills with my master. I provided collateral. It's hard because on one hand, I'm like, she's a victim too. But on the other hand, I'm like, no part of you recognized what you were doing was wrong. If you're truly a people pleaser, did you not care about the other people you were harming? If you wanted to help people grow, were you so unable to recognize the harm that you were doing and the fact that you were basically picking young women for Keith? You were so detached, it's hard to believe that. But then when I look at it from a cult education lens, I'm like, well, it is very, very, very possible that that's what was happening. But that doesn't, it's just like if you are a drunk driver and you hit somebody, just because you're drunk doesn't mean you're off the hook. You still did the bad thing. You did the bad thing and you have to take accountability for it. So Keith tells her that she has to make India seduce him. So she tells India, you have to go seduce Keith. And according to the podcast, her understanding of it was that India was just going to go let Keith take a naked picture of her. And I guess when they would send these nudes to Keith, which apparently at every DOS meeting, they would all get naked and send a nude photo to Keith, but it wasn't just like a selfie with their breasts. It was literally like legs spread, naked photos of the women. And so even towards the end of the podcast, Allison didn't really have the understanding that what she was doing was like sex trafficking India and her other slaves. She didn't understand that to seduce someone is an inherently sexual act, or at least that's what she claimed in the podcast. So now we come to the brand. Now, the brand was supposed to be a commitment to their growth, a recommitment. She claims still that it wasn't her initials, that wasn't Keith Raniere's initials. It was committing to your growth. And whether or not she genuinely believes that or if that's the truth, I don't think we will ever know, but I have a difficult time believing that. Getting this brand was a power move by Keith. He wanted to know that women were inflicting pain upon themselves to basically make a lifelong commitment to him. And she got other women to do it for their growth, leaving out that Keith was getting everything. That's something that's also so insidious about this. All of the collateral that every single woman provided, because DOS was growing, many, many more women were getting recruited. Many, many more women were getting used. Not all were asked to go seduce Keith, but they all got branded. They were all asked to do things that made them uncomfortable, but if they didn't get uncomfortable, they weren't going to grow, right? Such a crock of BS. But she shared her branding experience, and she said that she went and she laid down on a couch, she got it done, and her body was just in shock, and she went and she taught a class. She still just went and taught a workshop. I don't know how you do that, but she was devoted to her growth. She genuinely thought, I think, that she was getting better. But I also think there was a part of her that enjoyed the power that Keith was giving her. Now, fast forward to Sarah Edmondson being the whistleblower and things coming out. She still could not contend with the fact that Keith was a terrible person. So they decide to basically flee to Mexico and they go do a recommitment ceremony. And the understanding was that these women were recommitting to their growth and to Keith by pleasuring Keith. And this act was going to help them all grow and move past their intimacy discomforts. It was basically group oral on Keith down in Mexico. And luckily, the place they were staying was raided, Keith was arrested, and it all goes down in history, right? It took a lot of time for Allison to really truly understand the pain she caused. Maybe it's a self-protection mechanism in her brain, but I still just don't know. I still have a hard time grappling with that, especially considering there are audio recordings of her talking with Keith Raniere, him explicitly stating that the brand has to look consensual. Him telling her, we have to have the women say something before they get branded. Like, it would be an honor to be branded master, so that it looks like they asked to be branded. They consented. It was all theater. It was all pretend. It was all. So, since Allison's a flight risk and has the means to do basically whatever she wants, I think her bond was set at like $500 million, and her parents were like signing over assets to make sure they could pay her bond. She spent all the last remaining money she had from her acting and gave it to the lawyer for a retainer, and then was under house arrest for, I believe, 3 years. And I think that this makes people really frustrated because it's still such like a privilege. It's just like you get to go to your fancy house with your family and people who love you, and you're not from the outside like really processing what you did. You're just trying to get out of it. It's ironic because a lot of the comments too, and we'll touch base on this briefly, but since she did end up pleading guilty and she did end up cooperating with the FBI to help put Keith Raniere behind bars, she did get a drastically reduced sentence and she didn't have to plead guilty to some of the other charges like sex trafficking. So when she gets out of prison, she enrolls in school in like women's studies, and she ends up in Stanford, I believe. And then the students start complaining about her, saying they're uncomfortable in class. And she's just like, I was so confused because like I just wanted to help women, and like I want to be a social worker and I want to help people, and and it was just like, girl, you like the cognitive dissonance, like there's just something not clicking in you, that this is going to feel inappropriate to people. It feels like you're taking advantage of people. It's people in the class were like, I'm worried that she's going to use all of the like psychological tools to manipulate that she learned in Nxivm to like manipulate us or manipulate people she works with if she does become a social worker. So I just think that that's really fascinating. And the comments on that episode of the podcast were like, wow, what a privileged woman who doesn't recognize her privilege, where she's basically a felon and she's going to a Ivy League school. And then it's like, why doesn't anyone like me? It's you coerced women to have sex with a middle-aged man and also get branded. Like, you're an abuser. That's why we don't want you. And I believe people can change and they can reform and they can recognize their wrongdoing. And I do believe that Allison is capable of doing that, but I don't know if she is there quite yet. I also speculate here, but her husband is an ex neo Nazi who went to prison for kidnapping people. Let that sink in. I think that they found common ground because, they were both felons and they both grew and changed and wanted to be better people on the outside. But I can't help but wonder if there's a part of Allison that thinks that him being a neo Nazi means that he is worse than her. Like maybe in her brain, if there was like a tier of like what's a worse act to do to someone, in her head, she might think, well, being a neo Nazi is way worse than like being in a cult and thinking I'm helping women, but really I'm really hurting them. Isn't that better? So I just can't help but wonder if like she feels like it's like a trauma bond, but it's also like, oh, I'm never going to be as bad as like being a fucking neo-Nazi. I don't know for sure. That's just me purely speculating, and I hope that doesn't come across as mean. I'm not intending for it to. I'm just trying to be very transparent because I do still have a lot of empathy and sympathy for Allison. At the end of the day, she is still a victim, but she became like 70% perpetrator. And from the way she speaks, it just doesn't feel like she's fully come to grips with what she did to other people. It feels like she feels bad that these bad things happened because she was suffering consequences of her actions, not feeling shame for the actions she actually did. And maybe she does feel that. She does mention that shame and guilt are like really difficult feelings to deal with. But there's just something about the way she talks that makes me feel like perhaps she's not quite there to recognize the true harm she caused. It's really difficult because, I see both sides. Like I understand how someone like Sarah Edmondson was never going to want to listen to this podcast because it would be so triggering for her and so aggravating and painful and never want this person in their life, even if they tried to apologize. But on the other hand, she was such a young girl when she got into this cult. She had so much bad conditioning when she was younger when it came to men and place men played in her life. So was it just like the perfect storm? You're going to have to tell me down below. Now, I highly recommend you go listen to the podcast. There are currently, as of filming this, 3 episodes out on Spotify, but on the CBC YouTube channel that I will link below, you can binge all 7 of them. So that's what I did this week. But she talked about the statement she made to the judge because she was asking, basically for mercy. And I just wanted to read it to you because if you don't want to listen to the full 7-episode podcast, maybe this will give you a better idea of like the way she speaks. And you can tell me if you think she took full responsibility. To this date, it's been over 3 years since I last communicated with most of you. This period of isolation has been the most devastating but transformative time of my life. Because of the court's decision to allow me to remain on home confinement, I've had the opportunity to be alone with my thoughts in the most supportive and loving environment. Such an opportunity has offered me the time and strength I needed to confront the darkest parts of myself and come to terms with the pain my actions have inflicted on so many people I love, which is the reason for this letter. It is of now paramount importance to me to say from the bottom of my heart, I'm so sorry. I threw myself into the teachings of Keith Raniere with everything I had. I believed wholeheartedly that his mentorship was leading me to a better, more enlightened version of myself. I devoted my loyalty, my resources, and ultimately my life to him. This was the biggest mistake and greatest regret of my life. I'm so sorry to those of you I brought into Nxivm. I'm sorry I ever exposed you to the nefarious and emotionally abusive schemes of a twisted man. I'm sorry that I encouraged you to use your resources to participate in something that was ultimately so ugly. I do not take lightly the responsibility I have in the lives of those I love, and I feel a heavy weight of guilt for having misused your trust and leading you down a negative path. I'm sorry to those of you whom I spoke to in a harsh or hurtful way. At the time, I believed I was helping. I believed in tough love and thought it was the path to personal empowerment. I was so confused. I never want to be someone who is considered mean, But those aspects of my humanity have been revealed in all of this, and it's been devastating to reconcile. I've experienced overwhelming shame as I've worked to accept and understand all that went on and all that I chose. There were times I was not sure I would make it through this alive. The pain was so crippling. That said, I know that coming out the other side, I'm a better, kinder woman because of this. I know I cannot heal the pain my betrayal has caused you and your loved ones, but I can promise you that your hurt has not gone unseen, and acknowledging this has changed me to my core. I want to apologize to all the friends and loved ones I have hurt throughout this process who were not involved in Nxivm. I know many of you fought hard to show me the truth about Nxivm and Keith, but I didn't listen. I pushed you away and silenced myself towards you when you were trying to save me. I'm sorry I was so stubborn. I'm sorry I was blind to your care and deaf to your pleas. I wish with everything in me that I had chosen differently, but I cannot change the past. I lied to you again and again in order to protect the delusion I was so deeply committed to believing. I know that the sacred trust I broke cannot be reinstated without forgiveness and a significant passage of time. While I desperately miss my friends, I understand if you choose to not invest in a future that includes me. However, I hope you will accept this sincere apology and know that I will hold all of you close to my heart for the rest of my life, even if we never speak. The list of those harmed by the collateral damage of my destructive choices continues to grow as I become more and more aware of how my choices have affected those around me. I'm grateful I have made it through this process alive and that I was stopped when I was. I have the court, my family, my therapist, and a few amazing friends to thank for this. Please know I am dedicated to spending my life working to mend the hearts I broke and continuing to transform myself into a more loving and compassionate woman. Thank you for taking the time to read this letter. I hope it offers at least a little bit of peace and closure as this horrific chapter comes to an end. I'm so curious what you think about this statement because the victim impact statements were much more powerful. And I think one day soon I'll read those. And I understand that, like, since she took a plea deal, there's a possibility she can't offer more specifics because she's, avoiding other charges. But I don't know. To me, it feels a little hollow, a little hollow. And I understand, like, the deconstruction that it would take to recognize that you've done so much harm to people and something you believed in for a decade almost is actually super, super harmful to people would be really difficult to reconcile. It would be. But it feels like she's more apologetic to people who weren't in Nxivm than the people she negatively affected. And I think that that's part of why Sarah Edmondson and other survivors are just kind of like, forgive you. I can't listen to you. You did me too wrong. You didn't wake up fast enough. I think it's a very, very complicated feeling. And I feel like this phrase is getting overused now, but it is true. Two different things can be true at once. I can have a lot of empathy for her and what she went through and recognize that she was a victim and is a survivor. But I can also recognize that I think she has more work to do. She did some dangerous and very insidious things and did abuse her power. She did bring people into something that was dangerous. She did effectively sex traffic people. She forced women to do things that they were uncomfortable with because whether she believed it or she just wanted to look good for Keith, she convinced them it was for their growth. It's a hard thing. I feel like this is the perfect example of what I talk about all the time on my channel, where it's like you have to have a lot of compassion for people and like understand how they got into something so terrible, but you also have to be very realistic and say, well, at the same time you did these things, you did choose to do these things, and it's important that you be held accountable for these things. So I'm so curious to what you guys think about this, and I hope that I was, sensitive enough. I hope I was informative enough, educational enough. I hope I didn't, I hope you don't think I went too hard, too easy on her. It's such a, like, I feel so many conflicting feelings when it comes to this. Cause like I said, I listened to it just to take it in and had these natural emotions. And then I listened to it again from a more critical lens. And I was like, what, who does this bitch think she is? So I like, I'm so curious what y'all think. I'm going to link the podcast YouTube channel down in the description or probably the pinned comment down below with Tori's wish list. So go click on that, go listen, maybe go listen to the podcast, come back and we can chat about it. If you want me to go live this week after you've listened, and we can just like kind of have an open dialogue, because I have known in my real life I can talk to you about this stuff. So that's partly why I just drone on and on and on my YouTube channel. I'm like, somebody talk to me about this, please. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for your support, your understanding, and I really, really appreciate you for giving me your time and attention. Please stay safe out there, ask questions, and always stay skeptical. I'll see you in my next video very soon. Bye.